I was fortunate enough to see Harakiri in the screening room when it was just before it was first released. And I remember everybody in the screening was critics, technicians, things like this. We were absolutely mesmerized by it. We had expected something, but we really hadn't expected anything quite this powerful. Kobayashi, all of his pictures are critical. We knew from his earlier films that he was going to take a poke at established order, which is what he always did. In his very fine 9-hour trilogy, The Human Condition, he exposed the atrocity of wartime conditions under which the Japanese army was disciplined by their own officers. He stood up against organized authority in this way to an astonishing degree. We don't have almost nobody else in post-war Japanese film who stood up in this way and who refused to bow down to vested authority.
呵責なき幕府の政略のため罪なくして死刑を滅ぼされ奈落の底に喘ぎうごめいている浪人者の悲哀など異色に憂いのない人には所詮わからん。
The writings of Hashimoto are consistent in one thing, which is, of course, the theme of this picture. He, among other things, he wrote Rashomon. He wrote many of Kurosawa's scripts. All of these films subvert authority. They question authority without using any sort of leftist, ideas or anything, just on the basis of moral decency alone. This sort of outspoken social criticism was kind of a specialty of Hashimoto and made him one of the finest of all the scriptwriters. So you can find parallels in all of his work, which points to this tremendous demolition job that he does for us in Harakiri.
所詮武士の面目などと申す者は単にその上辺だけを飾る者。
Most period films, samurai films, chambara, are set at the very end of the Tokugawa period. This would make them at the beginning of the 19th century. One of the things about the Kobayashi film is that it starts much earlier, 1630, at the very beginning as it was, because the Tokugawa house didn't establish itself until 1604. And so we are now looking at the samurai daimyo shogun structure when it's brand new and hence very, very strong. So the interesting thing is that Kobayashi attacked the house at its very roots, at the very beginning, because he knew what happened when it proliferated and when it slowly turned Japan into what I suppose we now have to call a totalitarian state. Of course, one of the strengths of Harakiri as a film is that it is both generic and non-generic samurai picture. But the more you look at it, the more you realize that it's an anti-samurai picture.
いかに武士とはいえ、所詮は血の通うてる人間、霞を食うて生きていけるものでもない。
There are sort of two traditions in the Japanese film of that period, one of which is sort of the mindless chop-em-ups, the chambara, which are always very, very popular. Now we were seeing a new take on this. We were seeing a subversion which had such teeth in it that the true villains were those who had been the hero in the popular version. The picture is called Harakiri. In Japanese, the word is Seppuku, which has a certain ring to it, a ring of nobility, at the same time a ring of horror. It has complicated associations, this word, which Harakiri does not have. The idea behind slitting your belly open and dying is it's an atonement through an extremely painful way of dying, and is considered payment for whatever it was that you did that transgressed and made it necessary for you to do it. One of the horrors of this particular film is when it's discovered that he doesn't have a proper sword. He only has a bamboo sword. Not having a sword is a true offense, and therefore he must be punished accordingly. So it's atonement and it's punishment rolled into one. There's a further complication in Seppuku in that the young man who is forced to disembowel himself is, of course, in great agony, all of which is shown in full detail in the film. And naturally enough, he would want to end this. He would want to, as it were, commit suicide in the midst of an execution. The other samurai who observed that he is attempting to do this by biting off his tongue and hence bleeding to death is their reactions, of course, is outrage, because by so doing it, he is depriving seppuku of its meaning. Seppuku should be the thing that kills the person, not, biting off the tongue and bleeding to death. It's something like cowardice. This is one of the ways in which you not only cheat death, as it were, but you also cheat the authorities. They know what you should be doing, and you are disobeying orders when you do things like this. You're disgracing them. You're being disrespectful.
いやー、切羽詰まってとはいえ、歯で舌を噛み切るなど、褒めていいのやら、見苦しいと言っていいのやら。
Of course, samurai are by definition concerned with honor, with the right way of doing things. They're very Boy Scouty about this. By the same token, they are extremely careful of how they identify themselves. One of the main identifications of a samurai during this period, the beginning period, was hairdress, the fact that he wore a top knot. This is one of the things that indicated his rank. And so the scheme that our hero has in Harakiri, where he is going to not kill them, but he's going to cut off their top knots and present the top knots to the top man, is a lot of things. For one thing, it's an insult. It's not only an insult to these men who have now to pretend to be sick because their hair is woman-like down over their shoulders. It's also an insult to the entire structure.
腕の相違はともかく、武士たる者が髷を切り落とされるは首を打ち落とされたも同じ。不面目、不始末、死をもってさえあがない得るかどうか。
It was extremely clever of both Kobayashi and Hashimoto, who wrote the screenplay, to have used etiquette in this lethal kind of fashion to constitute shame rather than death. In using etiquette, which is established belief as to the way one ought to behave, according to precepts which society has agreed upon, when you do that, you usually need some sort of focus, metaphor. In this film, the metaphor is a suit of armor, which we see from time to time. There's a lot of ways to read metaphor. It looks very stern, looks very imposing, looks very frightening, and it's absolutely empty. This is one of the parallels then with the Tokugawa government. Big, stern thing, but a complete bureaucracy and completely empty. Another way of thinking about the suit of armor is that it also means the past, the weight of the past. The people we sympathize with in this particular picture are people who are not so controlled. They're on the outskirts. They're not so controlled by the past. The samurai, the daimyo we're looking at, are like marionettes. They're on strings, which the government, that is society organized, pulls. So the idea of using a suit of armor, empty and at the same time all-powerful, creates a metaphor which the creators of this film were clever enough to use throughout the length of the picture. And the way that it is photographed at the end indicates that the suit of armor has won, empty though it is. The ending of this film, one of the more tragic aspects of it is that everything that we've seen in the film is going to be expunged. Nothing is going to be written. And the fact that even though the samurai, he proved his point and won his case, as it were, nonetheless, all of this means nothing. All of this cannot confront the power of the organized state. There's a feeling of hopelessness at the end, and all the beauty and all the courage that we saw in this picture is for nothing. I think this is one of the things that makes it such a powerful picture.
または傷つくようなもの遠いい家には一人としておらん。
元福島家浪人嗣母半四郎は望みにより尋常に切腹。家中の者は全て病死。この切腹には一切何の関係もない。
The movie was extremely successful. Everybody agreed, all the critics agreed for once that it was a major statement. It won major prizes. Looking back now, the liberality for which Kobayashi, now dead, stood for, one didn't hear so much about it. Now the film has been, I think, recognized by all Japanese film historians as one of the finest examples of anti-samurai films ever made. It has taken its place in the history books. It is a completely acknowledged film classic.